He doesn't seem to be sufficiently worried about the risks of that. I think there's a very high risk of a financial crisis caused by his policies. That's certainly a big risk. Well, it is a real dilemma because the economy does show some signs of slowing, U.S. economy, and at the same time, inflation is still pretty well above 2%. It's closer to 3%, which is above the desirable target rate of 2%.
사실 지금 물가도 불안하고 또 성장 탄력도 둔화되는 이런 상황을 스태그플레이션이라고 부르는데 미니 스태그플레이션이라고 지금 현재 좀 볼 수 있겠죠. 경제를 살리려니 물가가 걱정되고 물가를 잡으려니 경제가 망가질 것 같은.
I think, well, the real problem is we make quite a lot of danger of having what's called stagflation, right? And this makes the job of the Federal Reserve very hard because monetary policy has to be, decided based on what people at the Fed think is going to happen in the future, which is a very hard thing to tell. And I think the real danger is that because Trump could get control over Fed policy in a way that no president ever has.
Are there things the chairman can say to you today that would make you back off some of the earlier criticism?
Well, I'd love him to lower interest rates, but other than that, what can I tell you?
And he will push for, too easy a policy. His people will deliver very easy policy with low interest rates. And that could cause inflation to rise even higher than it is, a good bit higher than it is now. Yeah, my name is Paul Bluestein. I'm an author and journalist. I used to work at newspapers, Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. And if you have inflation, long-term rates will go up because investors will insist on being paid higher interest to compensate for the erosion of the value of their investment. The Fed can't control those. The Fed can control short-term interest rates, but not long-term rates. It'll be, that's not what Trump will want. Long-term interest rates affect, mortgages. They affect car loans. It affects all the things that people care about when they borrow money, most ordinary Americans. So I think there's a big danger that will be the outcome.
지금 이제 인플레이션이 올 거라고 예상을 하고 계시는 거고 조금 심각하면 스태그까지 올 수 있다고 보시는 거죠?
Yes, I think there's a big danger of that because if Trump, suppose Trump does succeed in getting real control over Federal Reserve policy and they lower interest rates, short-term interest rates, as they will have the power to do, and that causes inflation to go up. That's certainly a big risk.
이 미국의 고용 지표나 경제 성장 지표가 흔들리고 있는데 트럼프는 금리를 인하해서 더 뜨거운 경제 성장 동력을 확보하고 싶은 건지 아니면 이 하반기 인플레이션이나 경기 침체에 대한 고민은 없는 건지?
Well, I think he does. Trump knows that Americans hate inflation.
From today and from the day I take the oath of office, we will rapidly drive prices down and make America affordable again. We're going to make it affordable again.
He will be very embarrassed if it rises even to the rates of, 2021, 2022, which we had in the U.S. when it rose to high single digits. I think one real danger, though, is that he would use his power to bully big companies to control prices. If Walmart or Target raise prices of things that ordinary Americans buy, he'll threaten them and he'll condemn them in social media, and he'll get all his Americans who love him to stop shopping at those stores until they lower prices. And that's a road to a very bad situation of another kind where we end up with shortages. I mean, we tried wage and price controls in the United States in the 1970s. It didn't work because you just end up with shortages. In effect, what you have is the cost of things goes up because people can't buy. They're not able to find them. But then the perverse result of that is that long-term interest rates would go up because of inflation, and that would have a bad effect on growth. So we could very well end up with stagflation. It's kind of perverse because he wants lower interest rates and more growth, but if the end result is higher interest rates, that'll be exactly the opposite of what he's trying to achieve. My guess is that if inflation really started to rise in the U.S., that he would understand the need for actions to stop it. If inflation rises and long-term interest rates goes up, he will be unpleasantly surprised. So I don't think he wants that. I just think he's not sufficiently aware of the risks. So I think we're already, I think, at risk of having some stagflation, but it could be a lot worse.
미국 경제가 굉장히 좋아 보이다가 조금씩 이제 뭔가 안 좋은 징후가 나오는 중인데 무조건 경제가 나빠진다라기보다는 굉장히 좋았던 상황에서 조금씩 후퇴되고 있다.
도저히 약간 이해가 안 되는데 트럼프가 연준의 독립성까지 흔들면서 금리를 낮추고자 하는 그의 속내가 무엇인지 조금 궁금하거든요.
Well, I find it hard to understand too, because I think, well, the real problem is he finds it hard to understand these things. He's always believed that tariffs will be good and that they won't be paid by Americans. They'll be paid by foreigners. They'll be paid by Koreans and other countries that export products to the United States. First of all, he doesn't understand that tariffs will drive up prices for Americans.
You're going to see price increases for the average American family of around $2,400 annually.
And he also seems to have this strange belief that when the economy is healthy, that's a good time to lower interest rates. The opposite is true. I mean, if the economy is healthy, then the Fed should be worried about inflation. For example, I think what he really loves is when the stock market goes up, especially the Dow Jones Industrial Average. He would love to say, I am the first president where the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 50,000. Oh my God! This is, I think, in his head. It's like the Nobel Prize for him. And he knows that if the Fed is lowering interest rates, generally that makes the stock market go up. But he doesn't seem to be sufficiently worried about the risks of that. And I think that Trump could get control over Fed policy in a way that no president ever has. If Trump, suppose Trump does succeed in getting real control over Federal Reserve policy by putting in, of course, he's going to have the power to appoint a new chairman in 2026 when Jerome Powell's term expires. And he's trying to get rid of Lisa Cook.
She seems to have had an infraction, and she can't have an infraction, especially that infraction, because she's in charge of, if you think about it, mortgages, and we need people that are 100% above board, and it doesn't seem like she would.
And he eventually may be able to even get control over appointments of presidents of Federal Reserve banks who also have voting power on the Federal Open Market Committee, the committee that decides monetary policy, and that causes inflation to go up. That's certainly a big risk.
Turns out this revision proves two things. Number one, the president was right, and this is why we need new leadership at the Fed. And it also proves that the Federal Reserve is holding our monetary policy far too restrictive. Interest rates are too high. The Fed needs to cut the rates because of the mess that we inherited from the Biden administration.
I used to cover the Federal Reserve. This really shows how old I am. In the early 1980s, I guess before most of you were born. At that time, we had very bad inflation in the United States and all over the world. But in the United States, in the late 1970s, it was getting up to about 13%, which was really shocking for Americans. And Paul Volcker was appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve by President Jimmy Carter. And even though Carter didn't want Volcker to raise rates really high, that's what Volcker did. And this really established the Federal Reserve as an independent central bank in a way that it had never, Americans could really clearly see. And that was hugely important. And that has helped that episode, even though people, there's of course lots of Americans too who weren't born then, but the Fed has credibility, and that has helped keep inflation expectations from rising too much when the economy, really starts to get strong. Even though demand is strong and people are buying lots of things, they don't insist on having higher wages, because they know that the Federal Reserve is there to keep things under control. So if Trump is able to push it, if he's able to fire Lisa Cook, it isn't clear he's going to be able to do that. There's a court case, right? There's a legal question about whether he can fire her. But if he does, then he may get a majority of members of there's a 7-member board, and there are 5 presidents of what are called the reserve banks. But if he gets control of the board, then he could also get control over the presidents of those reserve banks. And he could get some of his own people installed in there. So he could not only he could appoint a chairman, which is very important. The chairman has a lot of power to appoint the staff and to direct the agenda, but he could get control over the members of the committee. I mean, there's been a lot of very sensible analysis recently pointing out the, analogy to Turkey, right? In Turkey, a strong, very powerful president, Erdogan, appointed his own guy to be head of the central bank and insisted on lower interest rates. And they ended up with very, very, I think it went up to like 70, 80% annual inflation in Turkey. But, the president of the United States has a tremendous amount of power over policy. And he has the kind of personality that makes it very difficult for his advisors to tell him, Mr. President, you're wrong. I think other presidents, any president, it's hard to tell the president, you're wrong, sir. He's really uniquely, temperamentally incapable of hearing that kind of thing. And when people tell him that, he fires them.
You're fired.
You're fired.
Maybe it's a kind of a fortunate aspect of his personality. He wants to appoint people to jobs like Federal Reserve Chairman, Treasury Secretary. He wants to appoint people who have respect, who have, good academic credentials, and who look dignified, and who look good in the media, look good on television, So probably he would appoint a chairman who has, decent background in economics.
Are the top 3 still then Mr.
Mr.
Waller?
I am looking at Kevin also, and I'm looking at, I would say you could say those are the top 3. Good job.
Some of the people on the list that he's mentioned are, they're okay economists. They might not be the kind of people that would be as good as Jerome Powell, but they're okay. And as I said, if they do what he wants, and he because they're loyal to him, and he insists on that, he says, I'm going to appoint you, but only if you promise to lower interest rates. Well, if that makes inflation rise, as I think it probably would, then long-term rates will go up. I think that's a big danger. I think there's a very high risk of a financial crisis caused by his policies. Two things in particular: the huge debt, huge deficits that the U.S. is now running, and maybe even more importantly, the interference in the Federal Reserve, because those things could cause people to sell Treasury bills, Treasury bonds. Interest rates would rise, and there could be a really serious financial crisis. Okay, sure. I'm really honored to be. By your interest. Yeah, thank you.